speak with Joe Hockey shortly. And more pressure on Labor over what's shaping up as a visas for votes scheme. New international data revealing just how generous this Prime Minister has been doling out visas with a light touch on security.
How many of the 2,900 visas from Gaza have been cancelled? How many of the 2,900 visas from Gaza have been cancelled? How many of the 2,900 visas of people on shore from Gaza have been cancelled?
Well, they call it question time because it's not answer time, and poor old Dan Tehan there getting no answers today. We'll stay with this issue. Visas for votes, it's dogging the Albanese government. But the real issue is our right as a nation to decide who settles here. Now, John Howard famously spoke for the silent majority when he said this.
We have a proud record of welcoming people from 140 different nations. But we will decide who comes to this country and the circumstances in which they come.
Almost no one from Gaza coming to Australia is ever going to go back, as shown by the nearly 500 here on tourist visas who've already applied for permanent protection visas, claiming now that they are refugees. As revealed by the opposition today, Australia is taking more of these Gazans than almost any other country on earth.
The government has serious questions to answer today about their rushed process for granting visas to Gaza residents, now that it has emerged that Australia is among the most generous in the developed world, settling more people from Gaza than almost any other like-minded partner or democracy, more than our friends in the United States or the United Kingdom or New Zealand or Canada or France or Italy or Germany or Japan or South Korea or many, many others. Why has Australia granted 3,000 visas in just over 6 months when countries like the United States have only granted 17?
Well, not only that, but the government was never upfront with Australians about its plans to settle this many Gazans in our country, or the fact that they would use much lower security tourist visas to get as many in as they could, as quickly as they could. It was Labor Minister Ed Husic who on the weekend let that cat out of the bag.
Why visitor visas though?
Because they're faster to process. Refugee visas take longer, and given what's happening right now and the dangers presented, the view was to try and get people out as quickly as you can.
And look, they take longer because they're more secure. The claims are tested. There's more hoops to go through. So ask yourself, why the haste? Why the secrecy? It's now 10 months into this visa process and still the government will not provide Australians with straight answers to even the most basic questions.
Why have we adopted an approach of handing out tourist visas with much less stringent checks, not insisting on face-to-face interviews or biometric tests? And why are we bringing in so many more than so many of our like-minded partners?
Today, the exact scale of Australia's generosity has been revealed, and it's staggering to think that the Prime Minister has traded out national security for votes, because that's about all you can conclude when you look at the numbers he's let in and his failure to security check them all as should have happened given where they were coming from. Now, there are about 2 million residents in Gaza, and many have been schooled from birth that Jews should be killed and that the West is evil. At least 2/3 of them tell pollsters that they support Hamas and that they think the October 7 atrocities were justified. Their fellow Muslims in Egypt will take none of them as migrants because they think they're all potential security risks. Their fellow Muslims in Jordan, well, they'll take none either because the last thing they want is the risk of more Islamist extremists in their country. Ditto Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Kuwait and more. Don't forget, the Albanese government never actually announced they were handing out these visas to people from Gaza. It was only revealed when a journalist pursued Penny Wong back in November, and we then found out almost by accident that some 700 visas were already granted. Now, if the media had not found out, would we even know about this today? It was only because the opposition then put the government under a spotlight in Senate estimates back in February that we know about the failure to security check these new arrivals.
What's the average processing time for a visa like this?
Globally, for a visitor visa, the median processing time is 1 day.
1 day. Does that sound right to you? Is it possible that a visa was approved in a single hour?
Senator, it is possible.
How could you possibly do all the necessary security and other checks in just an hour from an applicant? I mean, that's lightning speed approval.
When we apply that vast range of information to consideration of visitor visas, so if you look globally, a very large number of our visitor visas would be done inside an hour.
1 hour. You can't even get your Uber Eats in 1 hour. Without security checks, without face-to-face interviews, without biometric testing, that's what's happening for these people. 24 hours, 1 hour, 2 hours, they get a visa that then gets them to Australia. Once here, they then apply to stay permanently. The use of a tourist visa is just a ruse. It gets them here with the lowest level of checks possible, but that's deliberate. It's by design. Make no mistake, Labor wanted to win friends out of these visas, and that's why they've set the bar so low. Other countries haven't been so reckless with national security.
Today it was reported that before approving visas for people coming from the terrorist-controlled Gaza war zone, Canada requires applicants to submit to face-to-face interviews and biometric testing in a third country, Egypt. Why didn't the government have a similar arrangement in place before granting more than 2,900 tourist visas?
Well, you won't be surprised that Albanese didn't answer that question. I mean, it's very telling that from the outset, Labor created a process where these Gazans were let in quickly, with a backdoor route to permanent residency, something that the opposition says they would never have done.
We think people should be assessed for temporary protection visas if they're already here in Australia that would allow them to stay for so long as it is unsafe for them to return if they meet the criteria and pass all the security checks for a temporary protection visa. If, on the other hand, there's evidence that some among this cohort are supporters of Hamas or other terrorist organisations, then their visas should be cancelled on character grounds and they should be removed from Australia.
So here's a difficult question for you. Why is it somehow our duty, in a way that almost no other country has, to rescue people out of Gaza from the horror that Hamas has created? Remember, those seeking to enter Australia aren't fleeing Hamas, they're fleeing Israel. They're fleeing Israel's retribution for what Hamas did. And it's reported that the Prime Minister is also considering establishing a permanent visa for people from Gaza, meaning presumably we're going to get hundreds, even thousands more. This too is something the coalition said that today they will oppose.
So do you think there should be any path to permanency for the people who are here now?
No, I think the great virtue of temporary protection visas is it offers people a safe haven when it is unsafe to return to their home, but when the circumstances change, they are able to return.
In its panic, the government's now trying to demonise Peter Dutton.
All we get from those opposite, Mr Speaker, is another day doubling down on divisiveness and diversion. Another day of scaremongering from the Leader of the Opposition.
All they care about is going down this negative road because we know who this bloke is. He shows us from the time he walked into this place and from the time he walked out.
I've known him for almost 25 years. He has a thick skin. But instead of the hysterical abuse, Albanese owes all of us a full and frank explanation of exactly what he's doing here. Why does he think admitting people from Gaza is a good idea? How many does he intend to bring in and under what circumstances? And how are these people from a terrorist-controlled war zone going to be adequately checked? Now, without any of that information, this looks like an attempt to change our country by stealth. either through misguided compassion or a cynical attempt to buy Muslim votes in Western Sydney. But either way, this Prime Minister and his government do not deserve our trust or re-election.